Have you bought this crochet kit from Kmart? Are you completely confused by the instructions? If so, know that you're not alone. Throw the instructions away, watch this tutorial instead, and I'll show you how to make this bucket hat. Now, the pattern for this bucket hat is actually very straightforward. It's very beginner friendly. However, there are some elements of the kit that are not. If you want to get stuck straight into the tutorial, I've included timestamps down below. But there are a few things it's useful to point out before you get started. So the first thing I want to note is the yarn that they include for this kit is quite unusual yarn to crochet with. It's not actually yarn, it's macrame cord. And it's not something you would typically use in crochet, although obviously you can crochet with it, and it is often used for things like home decor. Unfortunately, it's a pretty unfriendly yarn for beginners, and that's because it has zero stretch to it. It's a very stiff yarn. And this means it's quite unforgiving. If your stitches are tight, then you're really going to struggle to get your hook into your work and to pull the yarn through your stitches. It's also not the most pleasant fibre to work with. It's quite rough and it doesn't feel great on your hands. The good thing about this material is that it is very stiff, and so it does make for quite a good structure to the hat. It makes it quite easy to manipulate the brim and to have it sitting out if that's the kind of look that you want. However, it does mean that this bucket hat is probably a little bit less floppy than a traditional bucket hat. The other thing I like about this fibre is that it's actually got really good stitch definition, so you can see the parts of your stitches really easily. It's quite easy to see where to insert your hook, and that can be really helpful when you're a beginner crocheter. But if you're finding this material really tricky to work with, just know that it might be the yarn and that you might have an easier go of it if you try some more traditional crochet yarns. I think you could swap out the yarn in this kit for a cotton, a wool, or an acrylic yarn. I think actually a cotton acrylic blend might be ideal because the cotton will give the hat a little bit of structure. It's also a nice breathable yarn for what is essentially a summer hat, but the acrylic will give it a little bit of stretch, so it'll be much easier to work with. The other thing that struck me immediately is that the hook that they include in this kit is just way too small for the yarn. So they include a 3.5mm hook, but this yarn is way too big for that size hook. I sized up and used a 4.5mm hook. I probably would have liked to have sized up even more because I think even that is a little bit small for this size yarn, but I was worried if I sized up too much that my hat would end up too big. In the end, the dimensions of my finished hat is actually about a perfect fit for me. I'll include the dimensions up on the screen. So I would suggest that you should size up to a 4.5mm hook at a minimum. This size might still be a little bit small for some people, so you could size up even further, potentially to a 5mm hook. However, if you do that, there is a risk that you'll run out of yarn. I ended up with a decent amount of purple left over, but a very small amount of blue by the end of my hat. Someone posted in the comments that they had made this hat and they used the included hook size and their hat came out really small, which doesn't surprise me at all. So I also just wanted to highlight a few different options or variations for how to make this hat, which will impact the final look of your hat. So the first variation relates to how you deal with the color change. In this tutorial, when it's time to switch yarn color from the purple to the blue, what I'll do in the tutorial is just drop the yarn and then pick it up again when I get back to that color. The consequence of that is you get these loose strands of yarn called floats left in the inside of your work. So here I've stopped working with the purple, I've dropped it, I've done my row of blue, and then I picked the purple up again and continue crocheting with it. So the consequences of this approach is that you will get these loose strands of yarn in the inside of your hat. It is on the inside of your hat, so it isn't visible, but this still might bother you. If this bothers you, then what you can do instead is just cut your yarn once you're finished with that row. Just make sure that you leave a longer tail than this, probably about 2 or 3 times this length. And then at the end, you can weave all of these in. And I'll show you at the end of the tutorial how to weave in your ends. So that approach will take a little bit more work, and weaving in ends isn't always the most fun activity in crochet, but it will leave a slightly nicer finish inside your hat. The other potential variation is whether you work your hat in continuous or joined rounds. So the pattern uses what's called joined rounds. And basically that means you do a round, then you slip stitch to join the end of the round back to the start of the round, and then you chain vertically to get the height for your next round and continue. The main downside of working in joined rounds is that you will get a visible seam. So you can see here where I've started and ended each row, there's quite a visible seam down the middle of my hat. If this really bothers you and you don't want to have a visible seam, then you could work in continuous rounds. So continuous rounds means you essentially skip the step of joining and doing your chain stitch. So once you get to the end of your row, you just start crocheting back into the first stitch to start your next row. The advantage of continuous rounds is you won't get this seam, but it does mean you'll be working in a spiral, and so your stripes won't be perfectly straight. You'll get what's called a jog when you change colour, which is a visible dent in your stripe where your row ends and starts. So it's really up to you what's going to bother you more, the visible seam or the jogs. If you do decide that you want to work in continuous rounds, then essentially just skip the step in the tutorial where I show you to slip stitch and chain. Just omit both of these steps and start your row with your next double crochet and continue your round as normal. So this is a very beginner friendly tutorial, and the pattern itself is fairly straightforward. The main things that you'll need to know how to do are a magic circle, double crochets and increases. And I'll show you how to do each of these things step by step in the tutorial. If this is your first time crocheting, then I've also linked below a slower tutorial for how to do a magic circle and a double crochet. So if you're having any trouble, feel free to check those out. So with all that being said, let's get stuck in. Okay, we're going to start with the purple cord, and you want to start by making a magic ring. So to make a magic ring, you want to hold your yarn tail between your thumb and index finger facing down, and then you want to wrap the yarn around your first two fingers underneath and then cross it over the top, so you make an X on your fingers like so. Then you want to take your crochet hook, insert it under this first strand of yarn here. You want to hook the second strand of yarn, pull it through to the other side and then twist it so that you're sitting on top. Now we're going to grab this piece of yarn here, so you want to grab that bit of yarn with your hook and pull it through the loop on your hook. That's magic circle. Magic circles are a bit tricky, so I'll quickly show you that again. So yarn tail facing down, wrap it around your first two fingers and over the top in an X. Under the first strand, grab the second strand, pull it through and twist it on top. And then grab this strand here and pull it through the loop on your hook. Hi, I just wanted to quickly jump in here to tell you that I am very excited to have launched my own Learn How to Crochet kit. So if you're getting frustrated with your Kmart kit at any point and you want to upgrade to a kit that has better materials and better quality instruction, be sure to check out my Learn How to Crochet kit in my YouTube storefront or on Etsy or madeit.com.au. I'll include a little bit more information about the kit and what you can expect at the end of this video. Thanks so much for watching. Yeah, and then we're going to do 8 half double crochets into the magic circle. Now the pattern actually calls them half treble crochets, and that's because the pattern is using UK crochet terminology. However, I'm going to use US terminology for this video because it's more consistent with the other Kmart kits as well as the other tutorials that I've done on this channel. So to do a half double crochet, you want to yarn over and then insert your crochet hook into the middle of the magic circle. Then you want to yarn over and pull up a loop. You'll have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. I've included a link to a slower tutorial for how to do a half double crochet in the description below, so feel free to check that out if this is your first time. We want you to use a stitch marker to mark that half double crochet as our first one of row 1, and we want to do 8 half double crochets in total, so 7 more, all of them into the magic circle. I'm already fighting a bit to get the yarn through the loops on my hook, and that's really just because this hook is not big enough for the yarn. I'm not going to size up just because I think if I size up too much, the hat's going to end up being too big. Okay, I just want to jump in the edit here to warn you against the fatal error that I made, and that's to just start working with the cord as it comes in the kit. If you do that, then it's going to turn into a real tangled mess, which is what happened to me. So instead, what you want to do is try and wind your yarn into a ball shape and then to use that to crochet from, and you'll have a much easier time with avoiding tangles. Okay, once you've done your 8 half double crochets, now we can close up our magic loop, and you can do this by just pulling on the yarn tail and it will turn this into a little circle. Okay, and now to finish off our row, we're going to do a slip stitch. If you've watched some of my other Kmart tutorial videos, most of those tutorials have been worked in continuous rounds, which means you work in a spiral formation and you just keep stitching. There's no joining stitch and there's no turning chain. This pattern is a little bit different. So actually at the end of each row, we're going to be doing a slip stitch to join back to the start of our row, and then we'll do a chain stitch to start our next row. If you're not used to working in joined round, I suggest using a stitch marker to mark the last stitch in your round, because it can get hard to see which stitches are your real stitches and which are your joining and chain stitches if you're not used to working in joined rounds. So to do a slip stitch, you want to insert your crochet hook back into the first stitch, so the stitch that had your stitch marker. We want to yarn over and pull that yarn through the stitch, and then we also want to pull it through the loop on our hook, and that's a slip stitch, and that essentially just joins our round one back together. And then we're going to do our turning chain. So to do that, you want to do 3 chains. So chain just means you yarn over and pull that yarn through the loop on your hook. And this essentially gives us the height for our second round. So now for round 2, we're going to do 8 increases. So an increase just means that you're doing 2 stitches into the same base stitch. So we want to do our first stitch of row 2 into this stitch that had our stitch marker, and we'll do 2 half double crochets into that stitch. So do our first half double crochet, and then reinsert your stitch marker into that stitch that we've just done, because that's our first stitch of round 2. This yarn vomit is going to drive me crazy. And then we want to do a second half double crochet back into the same stitch. So we're working back into this base where the stitch that we've just done is coming out of. And that's an increase. So we've essentially put 2 stitches into 1 stitch. So we're increasing the number of stitches in the round. We're going to do this into every stitch along. So into the next stitch, we will do another increase. So another 2 half double crochets. And continue this for every stitch in row 1. So once I reach my stitch marker, now I know that this is the last stitch, and therefore I will do my last increase into this stitch. But the reason why I think it's useful to use stitch markers for both your first and your last stitch when working in join rounds, if you're new to crochet, is because it's really easy to confuse these stitches here for real stitches. So we've just worked into our last real stitch. This next stitch here was actually our slip stitch where we joined back to row 1. And then this chain of 3 stitches here was our turning chain. So we want to put our stitch marker back into that last real stitch that we've done, and then we'll finish this round off in the same way as our last one. So then we want to slip stitch back to the top of that chain 3, so the stitch before our stitch marker, and then you want to chain 3 as the turning chain for our next round. So by the end of round 2, you should have 16 stitches. Now for round 3, we're just going to alternate between half double crochets and half double crochet increases. So into the first stitch, so our stitch with our stitch marker, we will do a single half double crochet. And just move your stitch marker to mark that stitch. And then into the next stitch, we'll do an increase. So we'll do 2 half double crochets into that next stitch. Into the third stitch, we'll do just the 1 half double crochet. And in the one after that, you'll do an increase. And just repeat this all the way around, alternating between half double crochets and half double crochet increases. Yeah, one thing I'll note at this point is the difference between the wrong side and the right side of your work. So your work might have started curling in kind of like this, but this side here that's facing you is actually the right side of the work. And this side here, which has the yarn tail coming out of it, is the wrong side of the work. So actually you want to push your work through like this, because this will show on the outside of your hat. Okay, so to finish off this row, we're going to slip stitch back into the turning chain just like we have for the other rows, but we're actually going to switch color because we are now going to switch to the blue. The pattern suggests switching between the two colors every 3 rows. And so the way you switch color is you want to insert your hook into the turning chain to do a slip stitch just like we normally would, but instead of yarning over in the purple, you just want to yarn over or drape the blue yarn over your hook, and then you'll pull that blue yarn through both loops. And then you want to pick up the working yarn, so not this tail, but the yarn that is attached to your ball of yarn in the blue. And then to do our churning chain for row 4, we're going to chain 3 in the blue. And now we can do row 4 using the blue yarn. Just leave the purple yarn hanging, don't cut it off or anything, just leave it there and we'll pick it back up when we're ready to switch back to the purple yarn. Okay, so the pattern we're going to follow for round 4 is we're going to do a half double crochet into the first stitch, a half double crochet into the second stitch, and then an increase into the third stitch. So make sure to work into that first stitch with your stitch marker, and to move that stitch marker to mark the first stitch of row 4. So that's our first stitch, and then for our second stitch we want to do another half double crochet into the second stitch, and then into the third stitch we're going to do an increase. So 2 half double crochets into that third stitch. And then we're just going to repeat that pattern around of single half double crochet, single half double crochet, half double crochet increase. And by the end of row 4 you should have 32 stitches. Okay, so your final stitch of row 4 should be an increase. And then we're going to finish this round off just like all the others, so we'll slip stitch back into this turning chain. And chain 3. Then for row 5, the pattern you want to follow is 3 half double crochets followed by an increase in that row in the same way, so slip stitch back into your turning chain and then chain 3. And for row 6 you'll do 4 half double crochets and then an increase into the 5th stitch, and just repeat that pattern around. And by the end of row 6 you'll have 48 stitches, and I'll meet you back here at the end of row 6 because that's when we will switch back to the purple. Okay, so once you get to the end of row 6 here, we're going to switch back to the purple yarn, and we'll do that in just the same way. So you just want to insert your hook into that top of the chain stitch, and instead of yarning over with the blue yarn, you just want to pick up the purple yarn. So make sure you pick up the working yarn, the yarn that's still attached to your ball of yarn, not the little tail here. So you want to pick up that working yarn, and then basically swap out the purple yarn for the blue yarn and pull it all the way through to complete your slip stitch, and then you can chain 3 in the purple. So this is how we're going to switch between the blue and the purple each 3 rows. So next time when you get to the end of the next purple 3 rows, you can pick the blue back up. It means you'll have these lines, but they'll sit on the inside of your hat, so that won't matter. If these really bother you, you can cut your yarn and weave it in instead of floating it up between the rows, but that will take you a little bit more time. Okay, so the pattern's pretty straightforward from here out. Each row is really just a combination of half double crochets and increases, just like we've been doing for the rows so far. And every row is joined in the same way, where you slip stitch back to the top of the turning chain and then chain 3 as your turning chain for the next row. So I've put the pattern instructions for the rest of the pattern up on the screen. So essentially you're doing a combination of increases and normal half double crochets up until row 9. Then for rows 9 through to 15, you're just doing 64 half double crochets. Really will start to create the sides of your hat, and it'll make it start to go straight down. And then for row 16, you'll be doing quite a lot of increases, and that'll create the kind of start of the brim of the hat. For row 17 and 18, you're just doing straight stitches, half double crochets, 96 in total for rows 17 and 18. There are some increases in row 19, and then the final 2 rows are just half double crochets. I will update you at a few points as I go through the hat, so you can kind of keep track of whether your hat is shaping up in the same way as mine, and also give you a bit of an update on how it's going with respect to size. Okay, so here's my completed hat. So the final step is just to weave in the yarn ends. So if you floated your yarn between the stripes like I have, you'll have 4 ends to weave in, your starting and finishing yarn in the purple and the same in the blue. If you have been cutting your yarn and not floating it between your stripes, then you'll have quite a few more ends to weave in, but the way to do it is the same for every end. So you just want to grab your loose yarn end and thread it onto a tapestry needle. In some of the Kmart kits, they include a plastic tapestry needle. I don't believe that they include one in this kit, unfortunately. If you are picking up your own needle, then I definitely recommend a metal one over a plastic one. And you specifically want a tapestry needle, not an embroidery needle. Tapestry needle has a blunt end, which means it won't snag your yarn, as opposed to an embroidery needle that's designed to go through fabric. So to weave in our ends, essentially we're just going to thread our needle in and through a few different stitches to secure that end in place. There's no kind of technically right way to do it. You just want to work under ideally about 4 or 5 stitches in total, and you want to work in at least 3 different directions. And then once you've worked under a few different stitches, you can just trim the rest of the yarn end close to the work, and then that end is woven in. And so you just want to do that with any remaining yarn ends that you have, and your bucket hat will be complete. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. I really hope that you found it useful. If you are getting into the world of crochet, be sure to like and subscribe for more inspo and info for new crochet makers. Also, if making this hat has really gotten you hooked on crochet, then be sure to check out my Learn to Crochet kit. This is a kit that I've designed over the last 6 months, deliberately for beginners. So the kit includes pattern and step-by-step tutorials for 4 great little projects. These are deliberately designed to be good projects for beginners that will teach you all of the major stitches and techniques you need to tackle pretty much any other crochet pattern that you wish to embark on after finishing the kit. And the skills that you learn in each pattern build on each other in the subsequent patterns. The kit is also designed to give you exposure to different yarn fibers, different hook sizes, and includes everything that you need to complete the 4 projects. In those videos, I also talk a little bit about the reasons you might use different kinds of stitches, and I'll also teach you how to read a written crochet pattern by providing detailed long form instructions alongside short form notation and step-by-step video tutorials. And unlike the Kmart kits, I promise you that there will be enough yarn and good quality hooks in this kit. So if you're interested, be sure to check that out. If you found any of my tutorials useful, then you can buy me a coffee to say thanks. Link is included in the description below. But thanks so much for crocheting with me today, and happy crafting!